you're seeing a little bit now how the framing is going to be. It's going to be we're in favor of democracy
Right.
versus autocracy. This, of course, is complete nonsense so long as the U.S. is a close ally with Saudi Arabia, right? One of the most vicious, bloodthirsty dictatorships in the world, and currently engaged in wars against innocents in Yemen. So, yeah, spare me the whole America is against autocracy thing. And I'm sure we could find other horrible allies of the U.S. As well, but the Saudi Arabia is the easiest target, especially since it's such a long-standing ally of the U.S. It's also unnecessary for the U.S. to be close allies with Saudi Arabia, but for some reason we're supposed to believe that they're so much better than the Iranians or the Iraqis and so on. And keep in mind also that the U.S. Fought the Persian Gulf War in part to defend Saudi Arabia because the House of Saud was afraid of Saddam, and then of course we can all remember the Bush family, literally that George W. Bush literally holding hands with whatever current bloodthirsty despot was head of Saudi Arabia back at the time, which was, I don't know, about 2005 or so. And so, yeah, spare me on the anti-autocracy thing. Certainly, we can all agree that politicians are bad, and Putin is one of them. I reminded back during the Iraq War, so 2004-ish, that Lou Rockwell was on a PBS show, and he was, of course, talking about maybe you shouldn't murder huge numbers of
Controversial.
Iraqis for a country that is no threat to the U.S. And it was Bill Moyers. Bill Moyers asked him, "Well, isn't Saddam Hussein a bad guy?" And of course, Lou says, "Well, of course he's a bad guy, right? I mean, he's some horrible head of state. He's a professional politician. He got into his position of power by being a military strongman." But the point of the matter is, Saddam Hussein doesn't care what some U.S. citizen thinks about him, and we have no power in that situation. What does matter is, right, is that what we can say about our own state and try and keep our own state from doing crazy stuff. Putin doesn't care what any American thinks. And so I think our goal needs to be to prevent the U.S. from doing something insane, like invading Russia and possibly triggering a war. And maybe part of what is necessary in doing that is understanding that other countries have interests. And by other countries, we should maybe just say Moscow, right? And when we say Moscow, we mean the Russian regime. I don't know what the Russian man on the street thinks, but it's foreign regimes that have control of these weapons, and they have certain interests of their own. They have their own ideas about their version of the Monroe Doctrine, just as the U.S. would never tolerate the Russians coming in and taking over Costa Rica or Cuba or Mexico. And then we would all say, well, you have no right to a sphere of power, which is what some anti-Russia people are now saying, when the reality, of course, is the U.S. very much has its own sphere of power and would be willing to defend it to the death, certainly. And so let's just take into account these realities. The realities is that other countries don't want the U.S. taking over a country, which is basically what NATO enlargement into Ukraine would essentially be. It would essentially be, as in terms of foreign policy, annexation by the U.S. or France or Germany or some powerful NATO country. And the Russian regime views that as a very important red line, just as the U.S. would view the Russians or the Soviets in the past moving into Mexico, just as the U.S. freaked out over the Zimmerman telegram back in during the First World War, the idea that the Germans might be allying with the Mexicans. So this is common behavior from any large regime, both Russia and the U.S. So let's just start admitting, like, that other regimes have real concerns about preserving themselves, and maybe take those into account. That doesn't mean we think that these are virtuous concerns or that angels would have these same concerns. But you need to come to terms with reality before you start coming up with solutions to the situation. And we should know, by the way, that this is not some crazy new position. This idea that NATO enlargement has inflamed the situation and gone too far. There have actually on Twitter been a lot of good research and people digging up stuff from the past about what people have said about NATO enlargement. And You don't have to be Trump or some guy who woke up yesterday and realized that, oh, gee, I love Russia, so now I'm going to concoct some theory about how NATO enlargement is bad. Let's look at the record. We have countless people from a variety of parts of the spectrum saying that NATO enlargement was a terrible idea. We have George Kennan back in 1998 calling NATO enlargement a tragic mistake. Even Kissinger, who I'm no fan of and have criticized many times and view as, of course, one of the architects of the disasters in Vietnam, he thought and he wrote in the Washington Post that expanding NATO in 2014 into Ukraine was a bad idea. We've got former ambassadors like Jack F. Matlock, former ambassador of the Soviet Union, saying in 1997 it was a terrible idea. William Perry, who was Clinton's Secretary of Defense in 1996, said NATO enlargement was a terrible idea. You got Noam Chomsky saying it in 2015, which good for him. Although I mean, kind of a predictable position. But you got Stephen Cohen in 2014. You got Jeffrey Sachs just in the last couple of years saying it. You got Vladimir Posner, a respected journalist on the matter, said this in 2018. In fact, he's got a talk on YouTube with the title "How the West Created Vladimir Putin." And nobody thought that was a particularly remarkable Putin-loving position back then. And then perhaps more notable is John Mearsheimer's video on how Western enlargement has basically created the Ukraine crisis. And now he's being dragged through the mud. Some people are saying, oh, you know, if Mearsheimer's on your international relations syllabus, you should remove him. Let's cancel John Mearsheimer. Because of his video and essay, by the way, on the issue back in 2014. But of course, there's nothing pro-Russian about Mearsheimer. And in fact, he rather famously wrote back in the 90s that Ukraine would probably regret its giving up of its own nuclear arsenal at some point in the future, because that would open the possibility up of Russian invasion. And so the fact that he's been correct about this somehow makes people really, really mad. So now they want to cancel him and get rid of him. But it's not Mearsheimer. It's countless people. We could go on from this list of like 10 people I listed, because anyone who was paying attention to it for the last 30 years knows that NATO enlargement has been something that's been moving the United States toward conflict with Russia ever since. So it's just the reasonable position that many people have concluded. And you just have to have not been paying attention if you think that you've got to be some sort of crazy alt-rightist or I guess America hater, blame America first crowd in order to oppose the idea of NATO enlargement. This is a this is a bipartisan effort. It's just that now we're kind of in the middle of that initial panic over a new development. And this is just how some people lash out, that anyone who disagrees with you then hates America. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in social media and other places.